Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping straight into the recent court hearing, May 8th, in the Ko Wen-je case.
That's right.
And our focus today, really digging into it, is based mostly on what Huang Qiuchang said after he attended and what he posted later. We're looking at the reliability of a key witness, Zhu Yahu.
And the evidence overall, right, specifically these alleged improper donations linked to the core Pacific City, that zoning rate increase.
Exactly. You want to get a quick but really solid understanding of the potential weak spots in this case. So yeah, that's what we're aiming for.
Well, what jumps out right away, based on Huang's account, is just how much seems to ride on Zhu Yahu's testimony. It feels like the whole thing pivots on him.
Okay, let's unpack that pivot then, because there's this, well, it seems like a huge contradiction almost immediately. Huang Qiuchang points out that initially, during the investigation phase, Zhu apparently claimed that 2.1 million donation to the Taiwan People's Party. It was a thank you to Ko Wen-je.
Right, for bumping the core Pacific floor area ratio up to 560%. That was the story.
But then, in court, Zhu reportedly says something completely different. He testifies that the 560% rate restoration back in 2018 under Ko's administration was, and this is the quote Huang uses, completely legal and compliant.
And he even cited a correction letter from the Control Yuan.
Yeah, exactly. The Control Yuan, that's the government watchdog, basically saying the Taipei city government should have actually restored it even sooner.
So, okay. If Zhu is saying in court that the rate increase was legally required, essentially a correction, then the big question Huang raises is, why on earth would anyone need to pay a thank you bribe almost 2 years later, in March 2020?
Right, disguised as a political donation, no less. It just doesn't track.
That's the core tension, isn't it? It really throws a wrench into the prosecution's main argument about bribery.
It really does, because if the reason for the supposed bribe, the zoning change, was actually just them following the law, maybe even correcting a past mistake, well, the whole bribery premise starts to look pretty shaky.
It potentially shifts the whole focus. Maybe it wasn't bribery, maybe it was just, well, a political donation, which is legal.
Precisely. And this is where it gets really interesting. The questioning apparently shifted to whether Shen Xingqing, the guy from Core Pacific, tried to tell Hao, curry favor with Ko Wen-je.
Ah, right, the quid pro quo angle.
Yeah, and according to Huang's report, when the prosecutor asked Zhu directly, did Shen try to please Ko in any way, Zhu's answer was apparently just a very clear, very firm no.
Wow, that's quite direct. That pushes back hard against any idea of some secret deal or, an exchange happening under the table.
And it didn't stop there. The prosecutor apparently brought up some messages about a painting that Zhu wanted to send to the People's Party.
Trying to frame that as an attempt to bribe or influence Ko.
Seems like it. But Zhu's statement in court, again according to Huang, was that Ko Wen-je basically completely ignored him. Paid him no attention.
Okay, that's another crucial piece. If Ko is ignoring these gestures, even if they were intended to build goodwill,
which Zhu denies was the intent anyway.
Right. But even so, it makes that quid pro quo argument look even weaker. It makes you wonder if Zhu's earlier statements, the ones from the investigation phase, were maybe just, as Huang put it, Zhuguanyais, his own subjective guesses or speculations, maybe under pressure, rather than things he actually knew for sure.
So that brings us back to the donation itself. The 2.1 million. Prosecution says bribe. Huang Qiuchang says that's chuanzhou fuyi, like a really forced, far-fetched interpretation. What is the line legally between a donation and a bribe?
Well, what's fascinating here, legally speaking, is it often boils down to intent and expectation. Was there a specific this for that?
Right.
A legitimate donation supports a party, an idea, without a direct, explicit string attached for a specific official act. A bribe is different. It's value given specifically to influence an official decision.
So the prosecution is saying the timing, the context, it implies it was payment for the earlier zoning decision.
Exactly, but as we just discussed, Zhu's court testimony seems to pull the rug out from under that context. If he's saying the zoning change was legal and required,
then how could the donation be a bribe for it?
Yeah.
It weakens the intent argument significantly.
Precisely, which makes you look harder at how this information was gathered initially.
Yeah, and Huang Qiuchang raises some pretty serious flags about the investigation process itself. You mentioned this moment in court. The prosecutor asks Zhu, apparently kind of weakly, so what you said during the investigation, was that the truth? and the defense immediately objects.
And the prosecutor withdrew the question.
Yep, withdrew it.
Okay, that is telling. It raises an important question, doesn't it? Huang's read on this is that maybe the prosecutor knew they were trying to lean on testimony that might have been, well, pressured or Yudo kind of led.
Especially, Huang suggests, given Zhu was detained and likely really wanted to get out on bail, that Zhao Bao mindset, the desire for release.
And Huang used that specific term, Yaren Kugang.
He did. Detaining someone to extract a confession. What does that imply about how reliable that initial testimony might be?
Well, Yaren Kugang basically describes using detention itself as leverage. It's a serious allegation because testimony or confessions obtained under duress, under that kind of pressure, they're often seen as unreliable.
Right.
The psychological stress, the focus on getting released, it can absolutely lead people to say things they think investigators want to hear, maybe things that aren't entirely accurate just to end the ordeal. It casts doubt on the evidence gathering.
And it wasn't the only issue, apparently. Huang also mentioned this whole mix-up involving a donation from a Mr. Gao. He called it a complete Wulungi Chang, just a total mess-up and absurdity.
What happened there?
The prosecutor apparently confused this donor, Mr. Gao, with an executive at a security company, Zonggong Baoquan, who happens to have the same name.
Oh, dear.
And they alleged that Chen Qingcheng had told this executive, the wrong Mr. Gao, to donate as a thank you for the zoning raid.
But it was the wrong guy.
Completely wrong guy. The actual donor testified, made it clear it was just a misunderstanding, no connection to Shen or the zoning issue at all.
Wow. That really highlights Huang's point about the investigation being potentially Huangchang Zuban absurd and unreliable. Basic fact-checking seems to have been missed there.
Definitely raises questions. And getting back to Zhu Yahu's state of mind during that interrogation, he reportedly said in court something quite revealing.
What was that?
That initially, he didn't think there was any problem. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong. But during his detention, he started to feel like maybe he had committed bribery.
That's significant. It suggests his perception changed because of the detention, not because of an actual belief in his own guilt beforehand.
And Huang described that interrogation. Started morning of September 27th, went straight through till 5 a.m. the next day. Then they requested detention.
That's a marathon session.
Huang called it a typical case of detaining to extract a confession. What kind of impact could that length of questioning have?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that kind of prolonged interrogation, especially when you're already detained, sleep-deprived probably, wanting release, it can absolutely create a coercive environment.
Makes sense.
People can become more suggestible, feel pressured to give answers that seem to fit the narrative the investigators are pushing, even if it doesn't match their own memory or understanding. It clouds everything.
Okay, let's shift slightly. After the donation happened, Zhu sent messages about it. Apparently similar messages to Li Wensung, Saipi Zhu, and Chang Che-yong. His stated intention, he just hoped one of them might mention it to Ko Wen-je. But he admitted he had no idea if Ko ever even got the message.
So he wasn't even sure it reached Ko.
Right, but the prosecution seems to have really zoomed in on Li Wensung's reply. Apparently Li sent a polite acknowledgement back.
Just a standard polite reply.
Seems so. But the prosecution reportedly used that reply to accuse Li of accepting a bribe. And we should remember Li Wensung's job at the time.
He was chairman of the Taipei Metro Rail, TRTC. Not city planning, not party finance.
Exactly, public transit. So his role wasn't even directly connected to the supposed reason for the bribe.
So they're building a bribery case against him based on a polite, thank you for letting me know kind of message. That does seem like a stretch.
And Huang adds more context here. He says the court evidence showed Li Wensung didn't actually tell Ko Wen-je about the donation.
Oh, okay.
And further, Huang claims the prosecutor might have misled Zhu during the interrogation, suggesting Li had sent some separate donation lists, making him seem more involved than he was. But that was shown to be incorrect in court.
So the basis for prosecuting Li, let alone detaining him, seems incredibly thin if it rests on just a polite reply and potentially misleading interrogation tactics.
It certainly raises serious questions about the threshold for bringing charges.
It really brings us to that broader concern Huang raises about the potential motivations here.
Yeah, he uses strong language, basically, using any means necessary, pulling out all stops to fabricate charges.
And he called the Taipei District Prosecutor's Office the Dongchang, the Eastern Depot. That's a historical reference loaded with meaning, implying political persecution.
It absolutely is. So, expert, if you have a case that seems based on this account, to be built on shaky testimony, potential investigative misconduct, and maybe political motivations. What does that do to public trust in the judicial system there?
Well, this raises a really critical question about judicial credibility. If the public starts to perceive, rightly or wrongly, that the legal system is being weaponized for political ends, that charges are being manufactured based on flimsy evidence or evidence obtained through questionable means like prolonged detention, it can severely erode trust in the rule of law itself.
Which is fundamental for a democracy.
Absolutely. It damages the perceived legitimacy and fairness of the whole system. And that's why Huam is urging people, and why it's important for you, the listener, to stay informed about how this case unfolds. It's about more than just Ko and-jae. It touches on the health of Taiwan's judicial credibility.
So let's try to wrap this up. What does this all mean, based on Hwang Koo-chan's perspective from that May 8th hearing? We've got major contradictions in Zhu Yahu's key testimony.
Big ones. Between the initial investigation and what he said in court. Suggests unreliability, maybe pressure.
Right. Then there were these questionable investigation tactics, the potential Yaoren Kugong, the mistaken identity.
The seemingly very thin evidence for actual bribery, especially against someone like Lee Wen-sung, based on a polite reply.
And overarching all of this are Hwam's allegations of political motivation, of fabricating charges. It paints a picture of a case with a very weak foundation, potentially.
It definitely underscores how crucial it is to really scrutinize not just the evidence itself, but how that evidence was obtained. Public faith really hangs on the integrity of that whole process.
Which leads us to our final thought for you today. When you see these kinds of inconsistencies, these allegations about investigation methods and potential political motives swirling around a major legal case, what does it make you think about due process, about the presumption of innocence? And maybe what role does public attention, just knowing about these details, play in helping ensure the judicial system stays accountable and maintains its integrity?
That's the question to ponder. Keep following the developments, keep asking questions, and form your own informed view as more facts come out.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.